Hey everyone, so here we are again. This is our warm up. We are facing a lot of technical issues, as you can see. It seems to be around the globe. But still, here we are, and we are going to keep our talks. Here today, we are going to have someone very special who is one of our organizers. He is a very nice person. I am kind of following the way he's doing the organization. It's pretty nice. So please come to the stage. Rodolfo, here.
Hi, how are
Hi,
you doing?
how are you doing? We are pretty stressed with this. Everything is offline,
Yeah.
but it's working. So, what are you going to share with us today?
All right. So I'm going to talk about the career of a game designer from my perspective, which is admittedly very limited. But hey, I'm going to do the best I can with the little experience I have.
You are amazing. Don't be so noticed. I think this is the word. So
Okay.
I'm going to leave it to you. You're welcome. Say whatever you want. This is your home, and this is your stage. See you later.
Thanks. All right. So I don't know, you guys. That's it. Yeah, that's it. All right. Fine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the profession of a game designer and trying to understand a little bit what a game designer is and what a game designer does and how to become a game designer. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about me. My name is Rodolfo Mora Zamora. I am director at Ceiba Software and Arts, which is an indie studio in Costa Rica. I am also kind of a community leader. I am a member of the Costa Rican Association for Game Developers, ASODEF, and I'm also a coordinator for the Costa Rican Interuniversitary Developers Community, which is CIDEF. And in my day job, I am assistant professor at the Costa Rican Institute of Technology, where I teach about software engineering. I am actually a software engineer with several years of experience. And I am also an assistant professor at Universidad Creativa, which is a university specialized in arts. And I teach game development and game design in both in the Technological Institute and Universidad Creativa. So I have about 6 years, a little more of than 6 years of experience in game design and game development, which is not much, but it's something. And if you are familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is this curve with illustrates how much confidence you have for how much knowledge you have accumulated in one specific field. You have someone like, for instance, Sid Meier over here, and you will have your generic idea guy over here, and I am over here. So I know enough about this topic to know how much I don't know. Um, I am learning every day, and I'm going to share with you a few tips I have on how to learn a little bit more about how to become a game designer. But first, we need to understand what a game designer is. So let's answer that question. Uh, First, I need to kind of define the concept of a game technician. This will make sense really soon. So I define a game technician like an expert in the practical application of one specific aspect of game development. So there you will have your programmers, your Unity gurus, your Unreal developers, your illustrators, your animators, people who know a lot about a specific set of tools and a specific workflow from one part of the game development process. So if you have a game programmer, for instance, then you may have someone who is really experienced with C Sharp, who knows the ups and outs of Unity. And if you ask this game programmer to program a mechanic, a specific mechanic with certain parameters and specific functions, that programmer might be able to do it just as you asked. That's a game technician. It's someone who is specialized in one specific aspect of the game development process. The game designer is something different. So the game designer is a person responsible to envision the game, to think how the game will work as a complete product from finish to end and from top to bottom. And the game designer creates the rules and objectives and procedures and things like that. And this definition I have on screen right now is taken from the Game Design Workshop, excellent book by Tracy Fullerton. And basically, in a nutshell, the game designer is the person who takes a thing, a product, it could be a physical product or a software product or any type of product, and turns that into a game. So that's the role of a game designer. The game designer is the one who creates the components that make something a game. So the game designer and the game technician differentiate in the sense that the game designer is responsible for the product as a whole, while the game technician is only responsible for a task or a group of tasks. So the game programmer, for instance, is only responsible for the programming part, and you wouldn't make responsible the game programmer, for instance, if a game flops because its design is poorly executed, or if the game is boring. That's not really a problem for the programmer. If the game is boring, it's a problem for the designer. Usually, a game designer is a leadership position, so you will be in charge of a team if you're a game designer, and your tools are abstract tools. You will use applied theory in your games, and you don't have like a software that does design for you. The game designer doesn't necessarily use a specific software to work, while the technicians are usually members of a team, and they use very concrete tools. They use specific tools and instruments to work. For instance, I can say a game programmer will use Visual Studio, or will use Blueprints, or will use Unity, and the game illustrator, for instance, might be using Photoshop or might be using Affinity or some software like that. The game designer doesn't have like a software to do the things they have to do. And the game technician does applied technique, not applied theory. So the difference here is that the game technician masters certain specific techniques. For instance, I am a software engineer, so I have a lot of techniques for programming. So I know, for instance, how to make certain types of code or processes in an efficient way, applying certain techniques. But the game designer doesn't work at that level. It works at applied theory. It works at a much more abstract level. So once you're a game designer, and you need to figure out what roles you can fit in a development studio or a development team. It will differ a lot if you are in a large team or you are in a small team. So in a large team, you can be the game director. Most game designers' career track aims towards being a game director, the person that envisions the whole game of a really big game. Picture someone like Cory Barlog, for instance, or Tim Schafer. And you also have game designers in lower levels of the development workflow, and that would be a system lead. And for instance, in God of War, you have Cory Barlog, who is the game director, and you have someone who is in charge only for the combat system. So that's a system lead. That's the lead of the combat system, and that would be a game designer. And you have someone in charge of the puzzles team, the one who designs which puzzles or where to put different puzzles, and you have a level designer, and that will be another lead for another team. And each system lead will be in charge of a whole team of other designers and a lot of technicians. And of course, the lower tier would be a system designer, which is someone who works inside a system team. And for instance, if you have the combat team and you have a game designer who is the lead of the combat team, inside that you will have one game designer in charge only for the axe, and one game designer in charge only for the Chaos Blades, and something like that. So you can have a lot of game designers in the process that are working at different levels but all game designers are always working with a lot of technicians, and they always leading a team of certain size, and will always have another game designer on top, unless you are the game director, in which case you have to deal with the producer and you have to deal with other different administrative roles. If the team is a really small team, then the construction is a little different. The game designer could still be the game director. Usually, when you are a game designer, you are in charge of the game. But you don't be in charge of teams. You will be in charge of individual people who fill each role inside the team. And we could talk about a team of 1 people, a team of 2 people, a team of 5 people, something like that. Depends on the size of the studio. And usually, if you are the head of the studio and you are in charge of everything else, usually the head of a very small studio is also a game designer. Is the person who decides, I want to make games. I want to make games with my own creative endeavors and following my own creative path. So I'll make my own studio. That's usually a game designer, that person that decides to make their own games. And the difference is that as a software engineer would decide to make a company about software, an illustrator would decide to make a company about selling pictures or selling illustrations. A game designer will want to sell games, will want to make games for the market. So, right. Once you are starting to become a game designer, I like to group my tools into 2 different boxes. I have the high-level design tools and the low-level design tools. The high-level design tools are the ones who define how the game should be, the limits and expectations of the game. So when I say high-level design, I'm talking about things like this is a very early stages of the game, and we are making really big decisions here. So we are saying, okay, I want to make, for instance, a racing game. That's a big decision about the game. I want to make an action game or a platformer or a strategy game. And you're basically defining what the experience will be at this point. There is not a game, and you are still barely defining the very first steps towards that game you want to make. Now, the issue you have to be aware when you are doing high-level design is that if you make a mistake, if the design is not the best design possible, or if the design is flawed, let's say that way, the failure for that is catastrophic. With that, I mean that a bad high-level design means the whole game doesn't work. So, for instance, I was working a few years back on a racing game. We decided to make a racing game, and we started to make a few decisions about how this racing game would behave, how the experience would be. And the design we came up with, it was a very poor design. It became a boring game, and people didn't like it. So what we did with that game was to archive it and say, okay, that was a fun experience, playing with these tools and playing with these concepts. We're not making that game. We're moving on another project. So that's what I mean with catastrophic failure. A high-level design, a bad high-level design means the whole game won't work. Now, this isn't necessarily bad. This will happen, and will happen a lot. As a game designer, especially, you'll have to be accustomed to failure, and to fail a lot and to fail fast. So what we can do is that we can apply a few techniques to prototype faster and validate faster, so that our high-level design is validated as fast as possible. And if we are in a bad track, we can scrap that and work on another project. Usually the tools for high-level design would be design frameworks. These are like methods or methodologies which will help you define the steps to design your game. So there are formal design frameworks and empiric design frameworks, and they work rather differently. And I'll profundize a little bit about that soon. And you have your conceptual tools. Conceptual tools are like small tools that help define a little aspects about the game and that help guide the process alongside the design framework. So the empiric design methods usually start with an idea, a particular idea. This is like the most used design method in a game jam, for instance. Like in the Game Jam Plus, we will probably use an empiric method to work, and maybe without knowing it. And this is also, as far as I know, the most popular approach like in the world. Most people work with empiric methods. And you start the game with an idea, you get a working prototype as soon as possible, and you immediately start sharing and getting feedback for that prototype and starting an iterative process of adjust and adapt. And it's important to have a very close and good working validation group, like a focus group that will test your prototype and share good feedback with you and help you adjust and adapt your game as fast as possible. So in empiric methods, the design is driven by the results. And this what means is that you first prototype and then check if what your prototype makes sense. And it's data driven. That means that you collect a lot of information to check if the design is working good and the design is working well. And it requires this closed testing group, which is a rather difficult thing to have. Having that group of friends or having that group of reliable testers that will actually test your very raw prototypes and give you some validation, some quality validation for that is not an easy thing to have. But if you have that, then the empiric methods work very well. And these are methods that actually reduce risk a lot. If you are working with this kind of framework, the probability of the game having a bad high level design is lower because you have people telling you really fast how the game feels and maybe how to fix certain aspects of the game to drive it in the right direction. A few examples of empiric approach are the play-centric approach, which is described in the game design workshop of Tracy Fullerton. I mentioned it earlier. Prototype-driven design is also an empiric method. I used this method for a lot of years before I migrated to another one. I will tell you about it in a moment. And recently I was learning about an empiric design method called follow the fun, which means that you let the game design itself. Is weird and interesting, and I'm trying to learn a little bit more about it. So if you want to learn more about any of these, well, prototype-driven design has a lot of information in internet, in Google. For the play-centric approach, I really recommend the book by Tracy Fullerton. And for Follow the Fun, I'm actually barely starting with to understand this methodology. So I can recommend this video called Games That Design Themselves by Mark Brown. Make sure to check them and learn a little bit more about these methods. In contrast, you have the formal methods. The formal methods don't start the game with an idea. You don't necessarily have an idea of what you want to your game to be. You start with a target experience. You want your game to be intense and exciting, something like that. Instead of saying, okay, I want a platformer, you can say, I want a very difficult game. I want a challenging game. I still don't know what kind of game that will be, but I first design what kind of experience I want to transmit to the player. Once you have that idea of the game you want, like that experience set, you can also accompany that with a few ideas of what kind of game you want to develop. You will have to reinforce it with references, what we call like benchmarking, and you will start creating vertically. Creating vertically, what means is that instead of doing like the whole gray box programming of all the mechanics you want to implement, you focus on making one very tiny slice of game, but as integral as possible, because you're making in the process. So once you decide, I want to make my game a challenging game. So you check a few references, what kind of challenging game you want to make, and you decide I want to make a pixel perfect platformer, for instance, like Super Meat Boy, something like that. And then you start creating vertically. That means you create one level with jump working properly, and once that level works, and you start documenting. Okay, I made the jump like this, I make the platforms like this, the level design like this, and I can move on and start creating more content for that product. Formal methods are authorial methods. That means you as an author have a lot more control over the product, and are not data driven, are creative driven. That means that you have like a set of ideas you want to implement, a specific experience you want to convey, and that's what drives the game. The problem with that is that the risk is a lot higher with these type of methodologies, because you are working a little more alone. That doesn't mean you cannot validate. Of course, you can. You can prototype fast and validate fast and make decisions along the way. But the way the feedback integrates with the product is a little different, because you have to think about your priorities in terms of design first, and not the priorities in terms of what the player wants first. And it's a little different. It works. It's interesting. The problem with that is that the risk is higher. And the good stuff about the formal methodologies is that you can work them with a bit less resources. You don't need to have that close testing group to work. You can actually make a game following these kind of methods, and very few people know about the game, which is also not particularly recommended. But if you don't have like the reach to find this a reliable group, then it works. So the one methodology I know in this group is the one I actually use to design my games, which is the MDA, the Mechanics Dynamics Aesthetics, which was proposed in 2002 by Robin Honeykey, Mario Blanc, and Robert Subeck. And it's a very common methodology in academic environments. At the end, I am a professor at university, so this one stuck with me, and I've been working with it for a few years now. Is the one which I have more experience, and I've been working a lot with this, and I feel confident like working with these kind of methods. You will work alongside the framework, and will help you define a little more aspects about the game. And these conceptual tools are varied and a lot, and you will find in different articles, different essays or blogs, different tools that the game designers use. Here, the secret is to keep reading and find what tools work best with your process and use them. So, for instance, here in the picture, I have a screenshot from a talk by Cory Barlog called Reinventing God of War, which is in the GDC World. You can actually access it in YouTube. And he is talking about that conceptual tool he uses called the play pyramid, which defines a central concept and some systems that support that concept along the way. And the whole concept of the whole design of World War is informed by this play pyramid Cory design here. And you also have things like genre. I don't know that pronounce that word right. So you have conventions. For instance, you have a platformer, first-person shooter, RPG, racing game, or sports game, something like that, and you can work with those conventions to guide your process. So it's not like because you are using a play-centric or a formal method, not necessarily you are ignoring what the conventions say. You are actually integrating that into your design process as an additional tool. So that's high level design. Now let's talk a little bit about what is low level design. So this is the other box. The low-level design, it's one you use during prototype and production. And it's meant for very small decisions. So here's when you decide this is one mechanic, and this mechanic I will implement it this way and this way and this way. And in low level design, failure is mostly harmless. You can design a mechanic badly and fix it later, or fix it right away. The decisions you make in low level design have a lower impact, and if you make a mistake, if your design is not the best design possible for that specific game, you can fix it quickly. It will not necessarily affect the whole product as long as you find the mistake fast. So here again applies the concept of failing faster, right? You need to test your game as fast as possible with as many people as possible, so you can make sure you are in the right track. Tools for low-level design are a lot, and here's where things get a little more interesting, because there is a lot of people working different tools for different processes, and the usual thing is that most game designers will design their own tools on the way. So that's what's usually what happens. And some of those game designers will decide to publish that the tools they work with, and make a blog post, make an essay, something like that. And you can then reuse those tools, modify them, integrate it into your process. And that's really a really healthy community of game designers, which are interchanging different tools and discussing about how one specific tool works with one specific problem. So I have a few examples here. I usually use tools for designing mechanics and tools for designing dynamics. So a tool for designing mechanics is, for instance, a tool that will help me make decisions about one specific mechanic I'm designing. Like if I want to make a first-person shooter, then I will have to decide about the mechanic of the ammunition. And I can check the gameplay design patterns by Staffan Bjork and see what type of modulation I can apply to that specific mechanic, and how that affects other mechanics in the game. And the interaction loops that are proposed by Daniel Cook, that's a very second to second process where you understand how the player interacts with the game moment to moment. A really detailed tool to understand the interaction in a very, very granular way. And dynamic design is more meant to understanding how different mechanics and systems work with each other. So that's where you have your famous core gameplay loop, or the core mechanic diagram, which is this one right here. I took this image from an article by Charmy Kim, and things like flow and balance and things like that. So there are lots of tools of this kind of low-level design, and you can mix and match and use them as long as they are somewhat compatible with your framework. They will probably add to your specific experience. And probably you will be designing your own tools and adapting them. And after a few years of working that way, you'll be able to also publish a blog post or an article or an essay about the tools that you've been working with that help you along the way. So I'll talk a little bit about how to become a game designer. But if you've been following the thought process so far, you probably have an idea how this works. So the first thing to understand is that a game designer is actually like a senior position. So before you can become a game designer, you need to be a very good game technician. What I mean with this is that you cannot be really a game designer if you don't understand how to develop games. You need to understand that part first. You need to be familiar with tools and techniques, and you need to understand the different aspects of how a game is made. And in my humble opinion, that can only be achievable by making games. So for me, a game designer needs to be first a very good technician. Doesn't need to be a technician of any specific field. It's not like, I think, like a software engineer or a animator would be a better designer, nothing like that. If you've been working on games, doing some specific part of the game during some time already, then you'll probably be able to jump and start becoming a game designer at that point. But there is some experience required in that first part of the process. Um, Once you decide to become a game designer, let's say you have a few years of experience in programming or a few years of experience being an animator, and you want to make the leap and become a game designer, then you need to start changing the way your mind works and shift towards a transdisciplinary mind. This means a game designer needs to understand the game as a whole. A game designer must have a holistic view. Uh, a game programmer is only concerned about the code of the game, and an illustrator is only concerned about how the graphics look, how the illustrations work. And you might even have, if your team is big enough, an illustrator and an animator who don't exactly work well together, because the illustrator is thinking about uh, how a static image works, and the animator is thinking about how different animated pieces work, and they might clash a little bit in the middle. So a game designer needs to be able to see past that. A game designer needs to be able to actually communicate with all the technical roles and be able to speak their languages and ask them questions and propose ideas and feedback and etc. You need to be not only a good technician in your specific field, but you need to start learning about other technical roles, and you need to be a little bit programmer, a little bit animator, a little bit musician. Everything you can learn will help you become a better game designer, because you'll have a more integral view of the game as a product. So the other thing you need is to study a lot. As you've seen along the presentation, I've cited a lot of sources, books, essays, blog posts, video essays. I love video essays. Things like that. You need to study a lot. So every game designer sets apart a fraction of their time to study, to read. Mostly you will be reading a lot, and you can read postmortems, which are exceptionally useful to understand how different game designers tackle different experiences and problems. You can be reading articles, which are good but are a little difficult to apply. And you can be reading or watching video essays. I specifically love Bart Brown and the Architect of Games, Miller, which are my favorite game design essays in YouTube. And you could be reading books like The Game Design Workshop, or A Book of Blends by Jesse Shell, or A Theory of Fun. And you need to be reading a lot and studying a lot. And game design is also a skill in itself. So as a game designer, reading and learning is like reading and studying is not the only thing you have to do. You have to apply that and learn by making along the way. You need to do the two things at the same time. You cannot just watch a lot of videos and say, okay, I'm a game designer. You need to make a lot of games and learn how to apply that theory and learn how to adapt it to new experiences and new games. And that's integral part of a game designer. So it's important, if you want to become a professional game designer, that you start working on your own portfolio and designing your own games. And finally, to be closing with the presentation, I'll talk about what are a few career options for a game designer. So here, the first thing you need to think about is if you need some experience as a game developer before you can become a game designer, then there's some obvious process here working. That is, you can work your way up to become a team leader. You can, if you are part of a certain of a big company of our uh, larger company, and they have several teams. You can show a proactive attitude, learn a lot from your team leaders, show interest in moving forward. You need to be clearly proactive in your processes and be aware of how the company is working in the way that you can identify opportunities in the future. And of course, that is if the environment you are is you are able to move forward in your specific environment. You need to check that as well. And this is a long route, and it will take several years. So you don't jump to game designer right away. You need to take things slowly with this career. You can also say, I don't want to be a part of another one of another other people's team. I want to make my own games, and that's a valid route. So you can be an entrepreneur. And this is a whole different kind of experience. If you are an entrepreneur, then you will have to be very adventurous person, and you will have to be very aware and very tolerable of risk. So you'll probably have to invest your own money, and you probably have to network a lot and be investing a lot of your time to get the resources you need to be able to make your own games. And this includes not only the money you need to work, but also the people you need to work in order to make the game you want to make. So you could make it with a really small team. There are very good success stories with teams of 2, 3 people. But that only works when you have a strong network, and you have the opportunities, and you have a lot of luck. And this is complicated, right? This is not necessarily the long route, but it's a very hard route to take, and it requires a lot of effort. So you can succeed being your own game designer, making your own studio, and that's part of, as I understand, that's part of the idea with Game Jam Plus, to help people who want to go this route. And the only thing you need to know is that you will have to invest a lot of your time, a lot of effort in this, and it might fail. And you need to be aware of that and be okay with that. The other thing I would recommend is that you will have to juggle a job alongside the studio. I'm saying that because, well, we all need to eat and a place to live. And I would not recommend going solo, like going full time developer. I don't personally recommend that. Not until you have a solid platform and a risk management system that you can actually tolerate to flop a game and keep working. So maybe get another job, preferably some job in the same business that will help you network and will allow you to work your own company. That will be uh, that will be very good. But if you cannot make that, you cannot find that kind of job, then any job will do, as long as you have your resources to live and your time to develop your games. And of course, one of those options is to become a teacher. Now, when I say to become a teacher, I mean a lot of things. I am actually a professor in a university, so that's my job. I get paid for that, and I have a lot of obligations and responsibilities in that position. But I have the opportunity to research and teach about game development and game design in both universities I work. So that's a really good opportunity that presented to me, and I'm been trying to make the best out of it as much as I can. Not everyone has that opportunity. Not everyone can become a professor in a university, but you could, for instance, design a course for Udemy or something like that. Especially if you are not an English speaker, maybe you can design a course in your native language and target that to your specific demographics, and that might be an interesting way to make a dent in the specific field. And you can work that angle. You could try to make your own YouTube channel, and you could try other different endeavors that might be profitable in the in the mid term. But um, of course, you'll have to juggle that alongside the game development process. It's not impossible. A lot of people do it. You just have to be aware of the risks and be okay with that. And that's it. I don't know if we have a few questions or how if we can if that will be it, or do we have questions from the audience? Hi Jane, you're mute. Your mic is off.
Okay, this happens. We are online, and this is the things that happen only when I'm on screen. So, we do have a question. It's from Newer, and he asked if you can later send the link of the presentation that you used on the video. It is pretty clear, quite a nice flow on it. Also, something Newer said is that we who are sole developers usually have to take all positions in a game development, but it's always good to learn a little more about areas other than just programming and music. So about this, you put to us many examples of how to work in the dev area, of how to work as a game designer, but not only making games or not only being employed by any studio. And what this is something a friend once told me. We don't. Industry is a huge thing. You don't have to be actually making a game there on your hand and writing on a tablet to be making a game or to be part of the industry. Here on Game Jam Plus, we are part of the industry in some way.
Yeah.
But what kind of hint do you give to those people who are still looking for a way to go, looking if they are going to be a teacher, if they're going to be an uh, if
That.
they're going to have their own business?
Yes, of course.
It didn't go. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I think actually game jams are a like if you are a solo dev, I will actually recommend a go to a lot of game jams because I wouldn't want to be a solo dev for a long time. That's my personal perspective, and that means a lot of things. That not necessarily mean that I would necessarily have to work with a team, but I would like to have some support in some specific areas. So if you take, for instance, Team Cherry, they are only two people, kind of, because they have Christopher Larkin who is making the music for them, and yeah, there you have like other examples of teams that are like, oh, all right, I am just one person, but not exactly one person because there are other people who are helping me in different aspects of the process. So the most success stories, when we talk about there is one person or two people working in this game, there is actually a lot of more people behind helping them in the specific processes, and they don't get credit for the game design because they are not designing the game, but they are helping in different aspects, and you don't have to leave all that weight by yourself. Because it's a lot of things that you have to do as a solo developer, and not only making the game, not only the technical part, but you have to go to events and you have to promote your own game and you have to manage your social networks, and that requires effort and people to. And if you have someone who then that person is part of your team, then you are not exactly a solo developer, not exactly, right? You have people helping you in the process. So game jams work very well to know people who are like-minded, who might be really compatible with your style of working. And if you don't find the right team in this game jam, you might find it in the next one or in the next one. There are a lot of game jams happening in the world all the time. So, and that's also a very important also a good opportunity to
Um, I'm not sure if it is me or. Okay, so we are having technical issues. I think the internet dropped. I for a moment thought it was mine, but it's okay. Transmission dropped. We can wait a little, but please pay attention to what he's saying. Having teams, going to gyms, and knowing people, it's pretty important. We it's kind of hard to say that because we are a game gen. So we want you to come with us to join Game Gen Plus, subscribe, and everything. But this is not because this is Game Gen Plus. Also, this is because this is Game Gen Plus, and you have to make a business plan. You kind of be more ready for market, we think. But it's because this is something that actually works. This is something that we have to have in mind. We have to know people. On the area of games, you must know people. You must know how people does things. You must know how to make teams. How are they working? How are people working? Which tools they are using? Sometimes when you go with you on Gens, you have a lot of interactions. So you learn someone that has some sort of new tool that you never use to think about, and hi,
I did it
thanks.
again. Uh,
It happens.
yeah.
And I was just saying, I just completing what you were saying about how game jams are important for us to know people that they can help us with things like teaching us new tools, teaching us new ways to make things. Even if this person is going to make a part of your team, this person might be a part of your developing process in some way. So yeah, game jams are pretty nice on this. And talking about game jams, would like to complete something because I have a passion. Me.
Yeah. Okay.
uh, so, what hint do you give to the person that's going to be the game designer of a team on a game jam? I mean, it must have a lot of communication. It must have the the time is very short, so the person must decide things very quickly and decide how to make a game to work and show itself on a very short build. What hints do you give to the person that's going to be making it on a gym?
All right. I think there are a few things that you have to be aware of. It has to be a natural leader, and that means it has to be a person who is able to make decisions fast and listen to other people and integrate their opinions into your decisions. That's important. So being a leader is not like saying we're going that way and you shut up and go that way. It's more about understanding what the team needs and taking the right decisions to fulfill those needs. So that's important. If you want to be a game designer in a stressful and short time environment as a game jam, you really need to be aware of what the other people in your team needs and wants, and put that in your decision process. Make that part of your decision process. And that's the first. And also be mindful of how much experience the other people in your team have, because usually as for the natural process of how game design works, people with more experience or with better experiences will naturally become better game designers more quickly. So don't try to push it. If you find yourself in a team with people with a lot more experience than you, then try to learn from those people and let them guide your process. And if you find yourself in a team with people with a lot less experience than you, then you might have to lead that team even if you don't want to. So be mindful of that. Be aware of how experienced the people in your team are, and assume your role accordingly.
Yeah, that's pretty important. This is something that sometimes change how the team works in general. If you know that, okay, we have a lot of a lot of artists with experience, but the programmer is someone new, so we can think about a waterfall on the background. But if the person cannot program it to make it inside the game, it's
Yeah.
worthless. Kind of. You have to think on a way to put everything together. Maybe if you have experienced artists, you can make them make a very beautiful art, but with a very simple mechanic.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of a point. If you are a very good, for instance, a very good artist, or you are a very good programmer, but you never touched a game development environment, then you maybe not be the right role for game designer in that specific context. If you have someone who maybe have less years of experience than you, but those years of experience are with a game development engine and know how to make a game, then that person knows more about game design than you, and that's what we need to understand. Like experience in a field is in game development as a concept or as a field, it's an integral process. You cannot approach that from one specific end and hope that works. You need to be sure to have a little bit of experience with all parts of the process.
Yeah, sure have. So Leandro Al- Alga Lord Warrior said he is a developer, but he he has always been being curious about the game design area. I think
All
he
right.
gave many. I'm going to put the comment on the screen. This is easier to read, and let us choose more for me. Um, I think this talk was an overview about what game design is, and there are many things that usually we discuss when we are professionals. We discuss with each other, but when you are new, not everything of this is explained. Not all of this is so clear. So considering uh, there might be pretty new people watching this and thinking, "Whoa, I never thought of this. This is totally new." What advice would you give to these people, and what considerations would you make just for us to finish here?
Right. So the first advice I will give to a person who is starting to know about game development and want to learn more about game design is to go to it was called Gamma Sutra. Now it changed name. It's called something like gamedeveloper.net or something like that, and start reading postmortems. That will be my first advice. Start reading postmortems because most postmortems are from game designers, and then you'll have to learn about their tools, and you'll be able to apply their tools in your projects. So I'll say that my first advice that will be the entry point in this process.
You can learn a lot of others' mistakes. So, New Air just made a question. What was your hardest challenge as a game designer? Can you talk about the hardships of this area?
All right. So since you have to have an integral view of the project and you have to communicate with a lot of different people that might be very proficient in their specific fields, one hardship you have to face is that those people have different priorities. So, for instance, I was talking a few days back with an illustrator in my studio who wants to improve certain aspects of the art of a game, but right now in the production pipeline we are very 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 late. So I was telling him, well, that's how it's right now. It's good enough. I know you want to make it better and I understand why, but we need to check all these other processes and we don't have the resources right now to improve only this. You have to improve, you have to make sure the quality in the game is overall the same, and that's really hard. Telling other people like, I know you have other priorities and I cannot work with those priorities right now is a really hard thing to do, and it requires a lot of patience and a lot of insight, and it's difficult every time. And if you have good communication with your people, it will be a lot easier. But the fact that we have good communication and we can talk things out, and I can tell him right now that's not a priority, and he will understand. It doesn't make anything easier. What it helps is that his reaction is good. He's telling me, "Okay, I understand. Let's move on." That's because we communicate right. But the decision to tell him we cannot prioritize that right now is extremely hard, and it's a little bit heartbreaking. And for me, that's the most difficult part of the process.
John, well, I see it. This is something that sometimes might be done on a gen too, and sometimes teams have very nice ideas of how to make on
Yeah.
3 stages of the game, and there is only time for one stage, and how to cut things they put so much effort to do. And sometimes they have assets that are ready, but you cannot put on the build on the first
Yeah,
build.
yeah,
And
that will happen to almost everyone on the Sunday
yeah,
when they are finishing the integration parts. A lot of things will be on the cutting floor because you have so little time to integrate, and many things won't make it to the final product. And that usually happens on the Sunday. That's when people realize we won't be able to make everything we wanted, and we have to go with what we can and try to make the best product with this. And usually that realization, if you have a lot of experience with game jams, then you might be able to have a more streamlined process. But for most people, the Sunday is the day that you find out your game will be 50% or less what you wanted.
yeah, and sometimes saying this to your team is okay.
It's
Is
hard.
is best.
It's really
Yes.
hard. Yeah, yeah, it's not a nice experience. So for me, that's the hardest challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Do you have any considerations to finish the talk? We are about on our time.
Not really. I hope this was helpful, and yeah, I hope to see really good games in the Game Jam Plus. I'm driving a community, and we are really hoping to be a little competitive this year. So we'll see you in a few days.
See you in a few days, and I'm sure it's going to be competitive. Please, guys, remember we are um, registrations are open to Game Jam Plus. It's going to happen on this weekend, and be a part of us. Be your plus one, and if you are from Costa Rica, participate on this man's venue. He's making an amazing job, and you are
Thank you.
certainly have a nice experience. So I think that's it. We can say goodbye.
Bye.
Olá, manas e manos.
You are invited for the next edition of Game Jam Plus.
Quer criar o próximo grande jogo indie?
I'd like to invite my fellow flyover states and the rest of the world to come jam with us.
Mi nombre es Brian Hernández de Cartago, Costa Rica.
Patos de Minas, Minas Gerais,
Calgary, Canada.
Goiás,
São Luís,
Iran,
Liga Sul de Minas,
Portugal,
Brasília, México, Salvador, Maquedônia,
Uberaba, Minas Gerais,
San Jose, Costa Rica.
Uberlândia,
La Paz, Bolivia.
Manaus, Amazonas,
United States Midwest.
Atlanta,
Slovenia.
Engenheiro Paulo Francisco.
Game Jam Plus. O que é Game Jam Plus?
En donde desarrolladores, músicos, artistas podrán crear su propio juego con un enfoque de negocios.
Participants from all around the world come together.
É o local onde suas ideias tomam forma.
Y me complace mucho invitarlos a este gran evento.
I feel thrilled and blessed to have such an opportunity to be a part of this.
And I want you to unlock this achievement too.
Que es un evento internacional que va a tomar lugar del 8 al 10 de octubre.
from October 8th to 10th.
Entre el 8 y el 10 de octubre,
Dias 8 ao dia 10 de outubro.
This October, from the 8th to the 10th.
Dia 8 ao dia 10 de outubro.
Quiero invitarlos a formar parte de esta gran comunidad internacional.
It's going to be an incredible opportunity to make some games, meet some amazing people.
Espero haber más personas de todo el mundo participando de este gran evento.
Hope to see you there.
Participa, be our plus one.
Would you be our plus one?
Dit is de National Plus Event. Be a plus one.
Voy a ser muy gustado.
Be our plus one.
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 Join us. Be our plus one.
Be our plus one.